everybody. I'm Dylan Lockwood. I'm senior editor of Zpryme, and that's all that's important about me because these guys are the much more important ones. Why don't you join me up on stage, everybody? Please welcome our panelists to the stage. And we'll just go down the line, and have y'all introduce yourselves and your organizations and your roles. So, Bryan, let's start with you.
Hi, everybody. Bryan Hannegan, President and CEO of Holy Cross Energy. We're a rural electric cooperative based on the western side of Colorado in Glenwood Springs. If you've gone skiing in Colorado at Aspen or Vail or Sunlight, you've skied on Holy Cross Energy. And our claim to fame is that by the end of this decade, we'll be 100% carbon-free.
My name is James Woolwine. I'm the Vice President in charge of our PG&E account. I'm part of a family of 4 companies: Motive Power, Tin6, the NPUC, and the Gulch Foundation, which I probably will bring up later.
Hi, everybody. My name is Celina Bonugli. I am joining you from Arizona Public Service Company. We're also referred to as APS. We are the largest investor-owned utility serving Arizona. We have around 3 million customers, and I'm lucky enough to sit on our customer integrated solutions team, really responsible for thinking through our next generation of customer solutions. What does that innovation look like, truly in support of our decarbonization goals as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Bart Franey. I am a vice president at National Grid. National Grid is a large international electric and gas utility, and we have about 60% of our asset base in the UK, and about 40% of our asset base is between New York and Massachusetts.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm going to begin with our with keeping Earth weird a little bit. So just one quick thing about me: in my off hours, I like to host pub trivia. So I've got a quick trivia question for you, and just whoever knows the answer, feel free to blurt it out, shove over the other panelists if you need to, because your reward will be you'll get to answer the first decarbonization question. But can anyone identify which type of business for its primary service uses the chemical tetrachloroethylene, also known as PERC?
Hydraulic fracturing, oil and gas?
That is not correct.
Dang it.
Any guesses? Anyone in the audience know? Yes, that is correct. It is a dry cleaning chemical. It is also a known carcinogen and environmental hazard. So that industry is moving towards a chemical called D5 that is more green and sustainable, like the energy industry. So here's our so that's my very clumsy segue into our main topic.
Does it mean that someone from the audience who said that out?
Yeah,
First
come up.
Yeah,
they
get the first question. Where are they?
You're the next panelist. You have to tell us
Raise your hand.
about your organization's decarbonization goals. Yeah, so I'm interested to hear from the various utilities here about your organization's decarbonization goals, how they came about, and how the process of implementing them has been changing as you've been going along. We'll start with you, Bryan.
Well, as I mentioned in the open, Holy Cross Energy has a 100% carbon-free electricity goal by the end of this decade, by 2030. And we're planning to go carbon-free enterprise-wide, so that includes all of our materials and our fuels and trucks, et cetera, by 2035. As I mentioned, we are in a very recreation-focused environment. People come to Western Colorado for the mountains and the views and the hiking and the biking and the rafting and skiing and you name it. So not surprisingly, the communities and the co-op members that we serve are very environmentally focused. About 10 or 15 years ago, there was a concerted campaign within the community to put elected leaders onto the co-op board that had climate as their primary motivation. That board majority then brought me on from the national lab where I was working in Denver and said, we basically want to just decarbonize as quickly as possible. And so that's why we're one of 6 utilities in the country, according to the SEPA carbon tracker, that has this kind of aggressive goal. And by this time next year, we'll actually be over 90% of the way there. And the good news is that we'll have 7 years to figure out the last 10%, which, as you've all heard many, many times, is going to be a doozy. So we can talk more about that later. But for us, it's a mix of investing in energy efficiency, of cleaning up our power supplies and getting contracted projects and built projects to replace our existing coal-fired power supply. But it's also about developing clean energy projects within our community that have the added benefit of energy resilience. It's about modernizing our electric grid to accommodate distributed energy resources and actually see them as a help and not a hindrance to keeping the grid reliable, affordable, and increasingly sustainable. And then it's really about, in my view, the hardest part of this, which is getting the culture not only of the utility, but of the utility-community relationship, working with decarbonization as the North Star so that everybody enters the conversation in a place of problem solving rather than acrimonious arguments one side or the other.
Yeah, and Celina, I'm curious about how APS's goals have shifted in the process, and the processes have changed, especially because with your work with on the customer side.
Yeah, so we actually set our target in 2020, so we haven't had too much opportunity to adjust our targets per se. However, I will say that what is constantly evolving is how we're assessing how we go about achieving that target. We recognize that there will be all of those resources on the table. We also recognize as a business we will need to evolve to meet those needs. In that resource portfolio, we're considering customer-sided resources, increasingly knowing that those are going to play a role. I would also say that we are very much committed to supporting the innovation, the development, the research, some intentional use and implementation of new technologies, and we're going to do that all from a principle of reliable, safe, and affordable. Really thinking through what makes sense and when and how, right? So in this role of both setting the strategy and executing on it, our job is to be the good stewards for our customers' money. So thinking through the implementation of that with some thoughtfulness, with some intentionality behind it. I will lastly say that and we've heard this so many times throughout this entire conference, but we will be the first to say that we can't do this alone. We're going to need to work with our customers. We're going to need to work with a lot of the folks in this room, the data providers, to really figure out how to go about achieving this. So if you guys have great ideas, come find me. I'd love to chat.
Yeah, and Bart, how has National Grid's approach been evolving?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, National Grid is a large international utility, and with a UK being a big part of the portfolio, really the energy transition became mission critical in the UK. That sort of established the corporate strategic priorities, which really gave the US organization the empowerment we needed to make clear decisions around decarbonization or enabling renewables. And then the US caught up, and it was very timely at that point because we were leading the initiative in the US. And then when the US government caught up with the aggressive goals around decarbonization, we were able to collaborate very well with our UK colleagues on sort of the same goals and objectives.
And so, James, when we're talking about decarbonization, the title of the panel is Accelerating Decarbonization because, a lot of people feel, myself included, that decarbonization efforts are moving in a very positive direction in the industry, but not necessarily fast enough to avert the worsening climate disasters and things getting worse on that front. So when we're trying to figure out what to address to accelerate decarbonization more, there are lots of ways we can look. Let's start with just some of these energy markets in general, wholesale markets, tech markets, things that utilities need to get involved with to afford all this stuff. What needs to change in that landscape from your perspective?
So I see what we're trying to do as a moonshot. And so JFK, early 60s, he commits the United States to landing a man on the moon, who ended up being a Purdue graduate, Neil Armstrong. Not that we play basketball very well. You're more likely to get on the moon than win an NCAA championship if you're a Purdue graduate. But I think we have to commit, the federal government, the state governments, local governments, we all have to commit, get the resources that are absolutely necessary to do something to decarbonize, whether we're doing it as solar with battery backups, wind, small modular reactors, using hydrogen in different ways, but that we commit that we are going to be carbon free, and I know I'm going to sound ridiculous, this decade. That's exactly what John F. Kennedy said, that we will commit to doing it to this decade, and that we will commit the funds to do that, and we're going to have to develop a workforce that could be able to do that. And you're going to have to go across an economic divide so that all houses are given solar, are given battery backups. I live in a community, and I was talking to a guy, a community of multi-million-dollar homes, and they're trying to put solar and battery backups in every single home. They're trying to replace all their water heaters and gas appliances, but they can afford to do this. We've got to be able to make sure that everybody can afford this, that everybody can do this, be it an apartment building, a single-family dwelling. It is a moonshot, and this is our moonshot.
And I'll just add on that, in 2017, Holy Cross Energy didn't have a carbon target. We were primarily dependent on an owned share of a coal plant, which was built in 1992, and we were planning on that for our next 50 to 60 years worth of power generation. We had about 29% clean energy in the portfolio, and that was by virtue of just our wholesale provider, XL Colorado. And from 2017, we began the journey, and we said, we're going to set our target for 2030 precisely because it's this decade that we need for a climate action perspective, but also because we want to be held accountable for our own commitments. We don't want to make commitments that we're not going to be around professionally as board members or CEO or whomever to see. By 2019, so in 2017, our original target was 70% by 2030, and we thought that was going to be really ambitious. By 2019, we had already had plans and projects and contracts underway to get us to the 90% that we're going to be at next year. And we were doing that at a net savings over this last 5-year period of $28 million in avoided power supply contracts. That's money that we didn't put as a rate increase on the bill to support things like modernizing the grid, hardening against wildfire, dealing with cybersecurity, all the other things that utilities are spending against. In fact, we haven't raised our rates since 2017. And the whole idea was, well, somebody's got to go first and learn by doing and learn along the way. And if we can set a role model for the rest of the state of Colorado, then perhaps we can have a much bigger impact that 60,000 meters small cooperative can't have. And sure enough, every utility in the state of Colorado right now has a climate commitment and an integrated resource plan that's been approved by the commission or their board that will get them an 80% or better reduction in CO2 emissions from the electric sector in the state by the end of this decade. And so now the dialogue has become, okay, great, we've got this clean fuel, this affordable clean electricity, how do we use it to start decarbonizing the other portions of the economy, be it vehicles, be it the built environment, be it our industry. And to me, that's where we got to get to. If we're going to accelerate, like we know how to do the electric sector, let's do that so that we can get on to the rest of the economy as the climate demands.
I think, yeah, I like that. I mean, and another aspect of that is the customer side. Like, so yeah, Celina, when in the customer. On the customer side that you work on, how do you get them to take a more active role in decarbonization, not just necessarily with APS, but in their own like lifestyles as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I want to be clear and maybe enroll you guys in where my brain and my heart is spent a lot of the time. On our customers, we have a great customer to grid solutions team. There's quite a bit of us who we wake up every meeting and talk about customer wins and success. So I'm really honored to be a part of a growing team that's focused on our customers. But in particular, I work on our next generation of customer solutions. In particular, my brain has been focused on how do we start creating carbon-free energy programs, solutions. What's that next frontier beyond energy efficiency, DSM, renewables, et cetera? How do we then get them to that next frontier? So kind of in that space, now that you have a little bit more context of where I spend my time, I like to start the conversation with really thinking and empowering them to understand what is the focus, what is the goal, what are your priorities. A lot of our customers for the past 10, I'd say 15 years have really been driven by the purchase of new renewables, right? And while that has been, and has led to just tremendous change that we've seen in the markets, while that has been a great opportunity and will continue to be a great opportunity as we move towards decarbonization, I think there's even more opportunity if we shift the focus to that of emissions reductions. Not only does it doesn't always make sense to bring on renewables, so when you shift it to an emissions conversation, that allows more resources to be on the table. That allows kind of stacked opportunities, that layering of time of use, demand response, new technologies to really come together to really deliver a lower emissions profile for our customers. So I think that's a no-brainer for me. I would love to talk about how I then talk to them about their strategy, really identifying for them where we are already serving them, where our IRPs and our distribution integrated resource plans for everyone in the audience, where we're planning our resources and our distribution 10 years out. So how can we help educate you and let you know where we're already going to be going so that your actions on a voluntary, pursuit make sense in a holistic, good for the grid kind of way, right? And I love being able to then talk about their footprint and say, oh, actually, here are your opportunities. Here's where you can shift your load. Here's where you want to have 24/7 on an hourly basis. Well, these are the gaps, and let's be creative to solve for that, right? So it's a layered approach, but it really focuses on that expanded priority of an emissions reduction. And I'll probably say that a lot, so.
No, yeah, and it also seems to be a good way to help get to those like final percentages that Bryan was talking about. Like, earlier we heard from Paul Lau from SMUD, and like that, he's like, yeah, when we're trying to get that last little bit, we're just like building stuff in communities to help them decarbonize at a personal level, because that's the side that you have less influence over. So Bart, National Grid has a very, very large customer base. You've got a lot. You operate in a lot of markets. So when you're thinking about this ecosystem and this acceleration, where are you seeing the changes and the need for more change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, I think we're at a point in time that we have a lot of tailwinds around utility-developed infrastructure to solve the greater good challenges that are before us. In the space that I operate, it's traditionally the transmission levels type service. So our customers are a little different than Celina's customer. Our customer are large-scale renewables that we like to interconnect and deliver and make that shift in the decarbonization of the grid on a gigawatt scale. I like the kilowatts, but the gigawatts really excite me. So that is part of our mission, and with that tailwind, we're able to find a lot of collaboration between stakeholders, communities, large-scale renewable developers, and the regulators. So that is absolutely helping us make those investments. I wish the energy transition, from my perspective, happened about 5 years ago in the U.S., because we're running up against that that demarcation of 2030, and in transmission space, that's like, tomorrow.
Excellent. Now we can talk. Now we can talk about regulatory frameworks. Everyone's favorite part of the discussion. James, I'll start with you. When Motive is doing consulting work with various utilities, and they're frustrated with the regulatory environments that are constraining decarbonization efforts. What advice do you give them, and what are some common patterns and strategies you're seeing?
So first of all, they have to have a goal in mind, because sometimes you can't. If you have a direct goal in mind, then you could do a lot of different things as they come up, as opportunities come up. And sometimes you have to go a different direction than a direct direction, and so you have to go around certain things. PG&E right now has issues around bringing back up a nuclear plant. The regulatory requirements say it's going to take about 5 years in permitting. It's got to be done in a year and a half. So it's a challenge. There's nothing that we, as a consulting firm, can say other than be committed to that you want to get across this and that you have set goals in mind.
It's a little bleak.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I can't, I mean, we as a company we don't have the relationships with government entities that some other consulting companies have. I mean, our focus is we truly are pro-climate impactors. I mean, we're doing everything we can to decarbonize. We own a farm in Oklahoma that's a no-till farm, and so we're trying to sequester carbon. We created the NPUC where people can talk, and so the environment that they can talk in is that, okay, other utilities could talk about what they've done with the utilities, but that's not what we do as a consulting company. Yeah, it is weak, but that's just not.
No, I said bleak.
Oh, bleak. Oh, that reminds me of a time. I was at a friend of mine who was a winemaker, and so we're doing a blind tasting, and so it gets to me, and I'm not a wine connoisseur. I know what I like, and I go, it tastes really good to me, and the person goes, that's weak, and maybe she said that was bleak. I don't know.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I promise I was not coming after you. In fact, because that MPUC, we had a decarbonization forum that we did in California and Sacramento, and we were trying to figure out a lot of these problems. So passing it to the other utilities, when we're talking about regulatory frameworks, we could stay up here all day complaining about that. My regulator won't let me do this, they won't let me do that, and it's frustrating. So, but I guess for a more productive line of conversation, what in the general landscape needs to change, and in terms of how we think about designing regulatory frameworks and how utilities can build better relationships to get decarbonization moving faster.
So regulation in co-op nation is a slightly different animal.
Mm-hmm.
We have board members who are directly elected from the customers that we serve. But that's not to say that in some cases co-ops also don't report to a Public Utilities Commission. And in Colorado, while we are not directly regulated by the Colorado PUC, we fall under the warm embrace of the regulatory gaze every so often. And both good and bad. What I have seen work in my now approaching 6 years on the job, and then having worked in a previous career with EPRI and worked with utilities of all shapes and sizes, is being proactive, being transparent, and being collaborative. If you can structure your conversation where the first time that potential interveners in your rate case hear about your idea is not when you make the filing, but it's actually several months beforehand when you've kind of corralled everybody and said, hey, you know what, we're thinking about doing something like this. What do you think? What should we do to design it to achieve your goals as well? My former board chair at Holy Cross is now a member of the Colorado PUC, and she remarked to me a few weeks ago when we were together that what she misses is the opportunity to learn and understand really what's the story behind the story. And so, yes, we want to do decarbonization and we want to push it forward. And so we're going to have some really hard conversations about the role of solar energy without storage or without flexible buildings. What is the role for solar energy at a point where we've already got a net load shape in the solar peak that's below zero? And how do we deal with that in a way which sustains the solar industry, but also allows the grid to operate in an economically efficient and a reliable fashion? That conversation, which is going on right now and will amp up here in Colorado in the next few months or so, when you can start at a place of, okay, this is a problem, how do we all get together to solve it, as opposed to, this is our solution and everybody's shooting at it. My observation is the former works better than the latter when it comes to both regulation and, as we see a lot of times, legislation, where the General Assembly or the Texas Ledge or whomever decides that they know the answer and here it is. And then we're all stuck going, okay, how do we do this again?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, you know, in addition to being very proactive and transparent, regulators like to operate on facts. So we spend a lot of time examining, you know, fit-for-purpose use cases and solutions that helps animate the regulatory agendas. And when we go to them with, you know, specifics around cost and benefits, and it just doesn't end at the regulators. It goes right to the governor's office and the legislators too, because, you know, they're very busy, they're wonderful people, but, you know, they don't understand our business at all. And so we have to demystify a lot of that, and we have to be very practical with their sort of aspirations and temper that a little bit. And so bringing these facts really helps them sort of visualize what's necessary. So that's one way that we work very collaboratively with our regulated stakeholders.
I agree wholeheartedly with my peers in terms of best practices for working within the existing regulatory frameworks. But if the question is how do we evolve, what's needed to get to decarbonization, I have a lot of thoughts. But I think when you're looking at just very traditional regulatory practices, the traditional utility business model, we are not inherently incentivized to reduce emissions. Promised you I'd say that multiple times. I don't have the answer to this, and this is not a new question by any means. And I should also caveat that there's a lot of great state legislation as well as independent commissioners who are taking this on their own behalf to kind of drive this conversation around emissions. But at the end of the day, the utility is a business model. So how do we monetize? How do we put a value on carbon-free energy resources? How do we reward the utility for actually reducing load, which is not a primary, it doesn't go hand in hand with that basic utility model, right? So I continue to think about that. I think about the role of, in this existing construct, how do we make money as we evolve as a business and offer new services? How do we recover on new technologies? We've all talked about the role of distributed energy resources, right? We have an opportunity to, as a utility uniquely, to kind of pool those, to aggregate those, to help those meet our load needs, to shift away from when there's excess, you know, generation production. So I just don't know how we get a recovery for that yet, right? So those are questions that keep me up at night. And as I think from a customer program perspective, right, I continue to think about, are we valuing those resources appropriately today? When you think about energy, capacity, ancillary services, those are primarily around the, well, I will say where I'd like those to evolve is to include that emissions reductions profile, so that on a program side or from a utility perspective as a baseline, we can start to stack those opportunities to really get to a carbon emission. And this isn't new switching gears on you guys, this isn't a new perspective per se, or a new evolution in those regulatory frameworks per se, but I think the commissioners have this great opportunity, whether that's through exploratory dockets, by bringing these stakeholders together, by bringing the utilities in an active collaborative conversation to really drive that next frontier of technology, to to figure out the model where we co-own an asset with our customers, to think through how do we manage the risk across all actors that are involved when we take on some of these new technologies that really haven't fully played out to date that we are all evolving with. So I'm eager to see that regulatory conversation kind of evolve in that way.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions here, but I did want to see if there were any initial audience questions asking about decarbonization, key issue here.
You know, Dylan, I can't help myself. Celina brought up a really good, really good question.
All right, we have an audience question from Bryan.
Yes, Dylan. What do you think will be the role of the electric utility in a carbon-free future?
Let's see.
Did that work?
It's going to provide power, I assume.
I wouldn't be so sure.
Ooh.
I'm going to roll the grenade into the room because we actually have done a lot of thinking about this. In a carbon-free future where solar on the rooftop is competitive with grid supply, we are not the only game in town, right? Our business model is we sell kilowatt hours, we buy them cheap, and we sell them more expensively, and we use the spread to maintain the grid. If we're no longer in the selling kilowatt hours business, or if somebody else is doing it for us, as envisioned by FERC Order 2222, the solar and the storage ITC, and on and on and on, what are we providing? What is it that the electric utility can uniquely provide? It's the delivery, I will argue. It's the delivery of electricity from point A to point B, whether it's wholesale to retail or neighbor to neighbor or anything in between. And so one of the things to think about is at the transmission level, we have open access transmission tariffs. What if we had those at the distribution level? And what if utilities were incentivized and could make rates of return for being excellent delivery companies? I referred to it yesterday as being the FedEx of electrons, right? If we rethink our model there, then maybe some of the old conflicts between us and the consumer DER companies and the third-party aggregators and the community choice and the this and the that, maybe that goes away, and maybe we're all working together to accelerate decarbonization.
Yeah. So I actually, there's one thing that, and maybe this is reflecting my own ignorance, but one thing that's I've been having a hard time sort of wrapping my head around over the course of this conference when various folks have been talking about decarbonization is like there's this very clear hurdle to get over of decarbonizing everything in your organization while everything's getting electrified on the customer and public side, which creates this capacity problem. And the question is whether or not renewables can scale up fast enough to deal with that. And some people say no, they can't. Some people say yes, they can. And I'm not quite sure how this circle is getting squared, and if it's the big challenge to accelerating decarbonization.
I'm frowning only because that's true if we do decarbonization and electrification stupidly, right? We did a study a few years back with the Rocky Mountain Institute that looked at electrification on our system, and we took all the fancy projections and said, what do they all come to pass? And if we did it stupidly, we would have 3x the peak in the winter, and we'd sell 50% more electrons, which, by the way, in the old business model was like, hooray, we get to build stuff and sell electrons, but is the most inefficient use of the infrastructure I've ever seen. And if you care about consumer rates and affordability and equity, it's the last thing you want to do. So how do you then electrify in a smart way, which brings in and actually pays for flexible use of electricity, where our role now is, as it was said earlier in the day today, orchestrating how all of the devices that are consuming and producing do so in a way to levelize out and use efficiently that infrastructure that we've all collectively paid into. So I think this flexibility is going to be absolutely essential for those of us that are going to hit that last 10%, because frankly, I can't go build another big solar farm and achieve my goals if what I'm trying to do is do it on a 24/7 basis. Of the 90% that we're looking at next year, only 60% of that is going to be load matched. And you say, well, that's a pretty good number, but I'm like, yeah, but we got 40% left to go. And how are we going to do that? By becoming a more flexible and agile grid operator. And to me, that's where I think we as utilities need to go if we're going to remove the barriers to the rest of the economy getting decarbonized. And I promise not to speak for the rest of the hour.
Bart, I can see in your eyes you have a thought.
I'm sorry, say that.
I can see in your eyes you had a thought in regards to that
Oh,
question.
no, I hope he's right. Because it's a gamble. And if you can't EE your way out of it, like I was telling Celina, we got to start breaking concrete now, because what we're doing right now, the focus, at least in upstate New York and in Massachusetts and in the UK, is really around the rural networks. It's delivering the renewables to market. That's the focus. What isn't the focus yet is what are you going to do with those urban networks? Exceedingly more costly, time-consuming, and expensive. And if everything gets electrified, if you can't EE your way out of it, you got to start building now.
All right. I will now turn it over to audience questions if we have any. Raise your hand high because I can't see very well. Oh, we got. It looks like we got one up here. Yeah, we got one. We got a microphone coming.
Hala Balous, CEO of Electric Power Engineers and NRI.ai. I agree with the concern here, and the question follow on to, sorry, Brian, you're going to have to speak some more. On, are you saying you would be, your role would be, I heard today and yesterday, orchestrate and conductor. You'll be the conductor of like a balancing authority type of, from the distribution level up. And in that sense, are we saying, and should we say, and that's a question to the entire team, that on the DER side of things, the utilities need to have control over the dispatch of what's out there?
Sorry, James. Yes, I think the role of, particularly for the distribution utility, becomes one of balancing at a local level. I think that's absolutely right, especially if you're embedding clean energy resources in those communities as a measure of building energy resilience, which, like PG&E, we have concern around wildfires. So all of our projects, our solar plus storage, our hydro, our other energy resources are being embedded within our communities so that we have the ability to at least support critical infrastructure and first response, et cetera, during a potential future, fire event. I don't think we need to control them as utilities. I think we need to be able to influence them. And a really good example of this is we offer 0% down, 0% financing for battery storage for our co-op members. And we basically take care with local installers all of the costs of installing battery storage so that the bill comes to us from the installer and we spread it out, interest-free on the monthly payment. So it's like a monthly fee. We decrement, so we lower that monthly payment by a capacity payment credit of some $10 per kW capacity per month for the right to manage the grid with that battery. So we're basically saying to the consumer, we're going to give you an incentive if you allow us to use the battery. They can opt out and not get the incentive. That's what I mean by influencing. I'm not saying as a condition of interconnecting, we have to control it. I don't think that's going to work, to be honest with you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Got one down front here.
Thank you. Brandon Rose, SMUD Board of Directors. In my day job, I work for the California Air Resources Board, and I'm doing the commercial electrification and the truck rolls, although I don't represent them here today. But just for example, our 2022 scoping plan, California has about 82,000 megawatts of installed capacity. The plan calls for 180,000 additional megawatts between now and 2045 to meet the state's decarbonization goals, just to give a real concrete number associated with what we're talking about, and about 30% is imported. But Celina, what you talk about, the co-benefits is the term we would use in the air pollution area, and so we're doing the truck roll. I was just looking at it. This is California, 307 million metric tons of carbon savings over the lifetime of that rule. 419,000 tons of NOx and 86,040 tons of PM 2.5. But I know that because I'm an air pollution specialist in my day job. How do you see working with your air pollution regulators to quantify the benefits of these and connecting that to your state implementation plans, right? And the EPA requirements for a whole bunch of the country is out of attainment. And I think there's really key there is connecting the two together. Like, we're spending money to electrify, but we're getting these giant benefits that we'd be paying for in other ways. So interesting connections.
Not sure if there was a question.
Yeah, so what's your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how to make that happen, right?
How to make it happen?
Yeah.
I don't have the answers to that question, but I will say, let's do it. Let's enroll all of our partners, right? We can't work siloed. We have to be in alignment with our state, federal entities. We haven't really talked at this conference a little bit about our municipal governments who have a great opportunity to enact change within their own communities, and where we can not set those targets and individual actions independently, where we can come to the table and facilitate those broader conversations. Amazing. If it's a carbon emissions and how do we put a dollar to that so that we can all share the co-benefits, we're gonna need policy. We're gonna need energy markets to shift and evolve to really enable that. And where we can have a collective voice in making that request, absolutely. I didn't answer your question, but I would welcome additional conversations, and let's figure it out.
Thank you for that. We're low on time, and there's one part of this conversation that we haven't quite touched on, which is, so we'll have to go kind of lightning round on this one, which is just, what are your criteria for identifying key partners that help you accelerate decarbonization goals? What are you looking for? What are you thinking about? James, we'll start with you. How do you help your clients find them?
So you have to have someone's 100% committed to climate change, but then you have to have a cultural fit. To me, in hiring folks and getting partners, it's, you share goals, you share culture, you share, that you just can work together as if you were one company. That's really how partnerships should work, that it's beneficial for both of you.
Bart, same question. How do you identify them? What are your criteria?
Right now, it's all about expediency and scale. So we have a huge scale challenge in front of us. We're doing we're quadrupling our investment plan in the next 7 years, and we're operating under a 1X process, both supply chain and on the delivery models. So we need to rethink, our own utility framework, but also communicate that to our suppliers, because they can't scale to 4X if they're under a 1X model, so they're going to have to innovate around it too. And I think, as James said, this is a critical decade for all of us, so we got to really engage our suppliers too.
And Celina?
This is a fun conversation and a longer one than the time we have remaining, but I will say that 2 buckets of primary partners emerge for us. Without a doubt, the data, the tech partners in this space. We are, even in my role as a customer solution next generation of opportunities, I need help with telling that emissions piece to drive a decarbonization strategy for my customers. I need help with figuring out hourly tracking and compliance with an emerging market where some customers are asking for 24/7, federal agencies, et cetera. I need help in the technology space and thinking through what's that next advanced nuclear, the geothermal collaborations that go with my customers too. That's all key for me. But on the customer side, I would say it's a full broad spectrum, right? Like, I don't just need the customers who have sustainability targets. They are gonna be our friend in this space without a doubt. But even those who may not have set a target yet, but perhaps they have the most flexible load and they don't even realize it, let me proactively reach out to them. Let me get them to be a part of the bigger picture that we are telling, right? And even those customers that are almost no-brainers, guys, right? We have electric school buses sitting in our schools. How do we use them as our partners to push towards emissions reductions? We have hydrogen producers who are working to bring on storage. because they are trying to meet their IRA obligations to produce clean energy, they're a no-brainer for me, right? So it's a full and broad spectrum, really. And someone asked me the other day, like, what happens when you have too many partners, too much data, too much customer-sided technologies that you have in your fingertips? Well, when we get there, we'll cross that bridge. But for now, I would love to know all more than less.
All right, Bryan, take us home.
I think the cultural piece is huge, both for the utility and for the partners. If you can help us solve the problem, then you're my friend. And we also believe at Holy Cross that there's no such thing as a bad idea, there's just bad timing. And we're all really, I think, looking to work with creative and innovative, and dare I say it, maybe even some risk-taking entrepreneurs and companies that can help us solve the advanced challenges that we're not just going to face today, but that we're going to face going forward. And having a workforce that really understands that some risk-taking is necessary to get to where we want to go. Smart risk-taking, as was referred to earlier in the day, I think that's absolutely essential, and that's been one of our keys to success so far.
All right. Well, Bryan, James, Celina, Bart, you've all been fantastic. You answered all of my questions, which means you have won decarbonization / dry cleaning trivia. Congratulations. Give them all a round of applause.